Our first guest tonight's a guy who knows BYU football recruiting better than anyone else outside of Kalani Sitake and his staff. You can find him at 247sports.com and Cougarsportsinsider.com, and you can follow him on X at Rakoto10. It's our pleasure to welcome back to the Wise Guys Jeff Hansen from his lair. Merry Christmas. Are the Hansens ready for the big day? And what's the buzz around the house?
Man, we're ready. The kids are finally out of school, so it feels like we're ready for the first time of the season. We're excited, man. It's a good time of the year.
Stuff. I was going to ask you last time you were like, what is there something to the Rakoto 10? Like, what's the handle? Is it Rakoto?
Yeah, you 10? Know what? It's one of those things that you do when you're first back off of a mission, and it's your mission language.
Oh.
And then before I could like wrap my head around it, that hey, not everybody's been on a mission to Madagascar with me and knows what I'm talking about. It had already kind of taken off, so it stuck.
All right.
Okay, because I was like, is there some kind of subliminal message with this Rakoto 10 thing? And I didn't know. I had to ask you, Jeff.
Jonathan's on the stream. He says Jeff Hansen's the GOAT, so maybe he was with you in Madagascar.
Yeah, he might have been. Yikes. That's a high bar that I'm pretty sure I'm going to come firmly underneath that bar. There's no question.
Hey, if you were to describe BYU's latest recruiting haul as gifts from Santa, would this be considered a big Christmas, a nice Christmas, or a Christmas where you see your neighbors got all the cool presents?
Oh, man. It's a good Christmas. I don't think it's a Christmas yet that maybe it's not an all-timer type of a Christmas.
Okay.
But it's not a Christmas that you're feeling bad about when you go back to school after Christmas break is over.
Well, let me ask you this, because we're not really considering Chase Hansen to recruit, but if you add Chase into the presents, does that improve the Christmas haul?
Yeah, that's a big deal. I think absolutely that's a big deal, and that absolutely improves certainly the outlook for next year. And I think that that's so important to look at rosters now. I think Deion Sanders actually talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Rosters are so year to year now that bringing back a guy, for one more year, it used to be like, well, okay, but it's only one more year. But anymore, with the way that rosters turn over so quickly with the transfer portal, getting a guy back for a full year, especially a guy like Chase that knows the offense and all that stuff, that's huge. That's bigger than most transfer portal wins are going to be in this cycle.
By the way, Glenn from the Philippines says 34-31 BYU.
Oh, wow.
In a tight one. Cougars announced over the weekend edge rusher Hunter Clegg, who signed with Utah before his mission. Now that his mission's over, has flipped to BYU. He'll play for the Cougars next year. How significant is that? I saw one of his quotes saying that BYU's not the BYU it was when I left on my mission.
Man, it's huge. Hunter Clegg, I was actually trying to think about it, that in terms of BYU edge rushers that they've signed, Logan Fano comes to mind, and obviously that didn't work out for BYU. He's now at Utah. Longi Tuifua comes to mind, and injuries kind of derailed his career. I think that Hunter Clegg, though, is the biggest defensive end maybe since Bronson. I mean, it's been that long in terms of impact that he brings. When he was at American Fork, I got to cover several of his games. I think 4 or 5 of his games, his senior season. I called him Paul Bunyan. I mean, he just looks bigger than everybody else. He's faster than everybody else. He's really, really good. And I remember talking with him when he was coming out of high school, and he was really, really outspoken about how BYU checked every single box for him except for the football development. I mean, he wasn't shy about that he hadn't seen enough from the BYU defensive coaches and the development in that position that was a box that was able to be checked. Everything else, BYU checked every single box. He went onto campus several times, met with professors. He's one of the only recruits I've ever talked to that actually cited the dating scene at BYU as an advantage for BYU coming out of high school. But it was just that football development stuff. So huge kudos to Jay Hill and this new defensive staff. And I think once Hunter got home, he saw that. Every other box was checked, and now they're checking that developmental box on the defense. And I think this was an easy decision for him when he came back.
And he's longer, like it's the kind of defense man that BYU's looking at. He's between 6'4", 6'5", kind of a guy. You say looks like Paul Bunyan. Coming out of high school, I was thinking, man, he's got the kind of frame where he can put some weight on. Who does he remind you? I was thinking, like, can he be Ryan Denny or somebody like that? Eventually, is that the kind of guy, or is there somebody else that you think of once he's fully developed and the size that he's going to be, who can he be like that people will remember that played in BYU's defense?
Well, he reminds me so much of Tyler Batty. I mean, so that's just a recent name. He's not as tall as Tyler is, but he's that same just big physical force that he's got the quickness. He's got all those things that Tyler has as well. But at the end of the day, Batty just overpowers people, right? And I see so much of that in Hunter Clegg. I think Ryan Denny's a good comp as well, because I do think he's going to get bigger. I think he ends up playing, I want to say BYU listed him at 240, 245, something like that. I would bet he ends up, when he's a sophomore, he's probably playing at 265, 270, that bigger defensive end. But he reminds me just in the way that he gets off the line of scrimmage and his physicality getting into the chest of offensive tackles reminds me a lot of what Tyler Batty does.
Nice. Well, I said to somebody the other day when the news came out, I was like, yeah, he kind of, like his body type reminds me a little bit of Ryan Denny. And somebody said, was Ryan any good? I'm like, dude, Ryan played in the NFL for like 9 seasons. He was great. They're like, oh, I didn't know that. Well, then Ryan Denny's good. I'm like, yes, he's very, very good.
Jeff, today, Texas linebacker Siale Akana, I want to say that right, Akana, committed to BYU. So he's leaving the Longhorns and coming back to the state of Utah. How big is that?
If he would have signed with BYU a few years ago, he's in the top 5. In terms of highest rated recruits to ever sign with BYU. That's how big of a deal he was coming out of high school. He went into a loaded Texas roster. Obviously, they've been to the playoff in back-to-back years. I mean, it's tough to crack through that rotation as a true freshman, as a true sophomore. And he wasn't able to do that in Austin. So he's a little less heralded now, but that talent is still there. The guy that was, I don't think he was quite a 5-star, but he was pushing 5-star status coming out of high school. He's exciting. He's explosive off the line of scrimmage. And I think what I'm most excited for with Siale is the versatility that he's going to allow Jay Hill and really from a defensive play calling standpoint, this defensive staff to use. Because he's a true pass rusher. He reminds me a little bit of Ephraim Asiata. He's not going to be the biggest guy. He's not a true defensive end that's going to line up at 250 pounds. I think he's going to play some linebacker, but I think he's going to play up front on a rush end, kind of that outside linebacker role. He could drop back and play coverage. He showed a lot of that during his high school career at Skyridge. So I think he's exciting as a player, and I think I'm excited to watch Jay Hill, the play caller, figure out how to use him because he can do so many different things at different levels of the defense. I think that Jay's going to really be able to disguise what Akana is doing, and he's going to have a huge impact as a result.
It seems like BYU, not only with guys they have in the program, with some younger guys that they're excited about, you mentioned Ephraim, and now these pickups, they've got edge rushers and defensive ends. It feels like they've got that. An area of concern is inside D tackles, and they had 2 of the best in the league. Nobody knew that Nelson, that these guys were going to be so good inside. Blake and John were tremendous in there. And then we hear that Utah defensive tackle Keanu Tanuvasa is in the transfer portal today. 19 starts under his belt at Utah. And that would be a really nice fix for BYU inside. What's the word on interest from him in BYU?
Yeah, that would be huge. That's a day one immediate type of solution. The national buzz about Tanuvasa is that USC is involved and that Michigan is involved. I hear a lot about BYU. When I talk with people in and around the program, I've covered Keanu Tanavas. I think the first time I saw him at a camp, he was just a sophomore back in 2016, 2017. I think BYU is firmly in the mix here, and I would maybe even say if they're not the favorite, they're one of the favorites, and it's neck and neck with some of these other schools that are involved. I think BYU is going to be very much a factor. Tanuvasa is different, right? I mean, there's a lot of motives for why somebody enters the transfer portal in today's era. A lot of it is money driven. There's no question. There's guys that's what they're looking for. They want that top dollar. I don't think Keanu Tanuvasa is that guy. He wants to get paid fairly for sure, like everybody else does. But he's not that guy who's going to sell everything out everything else out in the name of maximizing and getting that top offer, no matter where it comes from. He's looking for fit. He's got deep connections with his coaching staff, with the roster. Sione Poa was the one who recruited him to Utah when he was coming out of high school. So there's a lot of things that play in BYU's favor, and I think that BYU absolutely in the mix. And if they are going to get Tanuvasa, I think it happens really, really quickly. If this drags out for a few weeks, then I think other players get into the mix, other visits start to happen, and then anything can happen at that point. But I think BYU, they're going to want to move pretty quickly. Long-standing relationship. There's not a lot of discovery that's going to happen from Tanuvasa's side. So I think this one could move fast, and I think BYU's right in the mix. And then Blaine, you nailed it. I mean, he's a day one solution. He immediately is a starter. He's familiar with not the same defense, but there's enough similarities with what BYU does and what Utah does that he's not going to need a whole year to figure it out. He's going to come in, would participate in spring ball, and then make an immediate impact in September.
I asked you in an interview on Sports Nation not long ago when recruiting was announced, and we always like to say, well, where are they at with the Utes? Have they caught the Utes? And the Utes had a 12-year head start or whatever as a recruit to a P4. If they land Tanavasa, how big of a punch to the gut is that for Utah?
It's a big deal. I mean, I think Utah will try to downplay it, but it's a big deal. If you remember the gut punch when Logan Fano left from BYU and went to Utah, it's going to feel a lot like that, but on the other side, right? I mean, BYU's going to feel great. They get that day one type guy. That's going to be huge. We've been there. I remember when it was Logan Fano who left. That hurt because he came in, he got hurt, but he came in and immediately made an impact. Yeah. And it was so exciting to see what he was going to bring for BYU, bring to the table. And then he did it in Salt Lake, and that hurt. And we've watched him have success. I think Keanu Tanavas is in that same boat, and especially the timing of it in terms of the impact for Utah. Defensive tackles are hard to come by in the transfer portal. I mean, they're tough. And this late in the cycle, they've lost some guys to graduation. That's a big blow to lose a guy like Tanuvasa, who was already a starter. They've already lost Junior Tafuna to graduation. They've got holes in the interior of that defensive line for the first time in a long time without Tanuvasa in the mix.
BYU football recruiting expert Jeff Hansen of 24/7 Sports and CougarSportsInsider.com is on the Wise Guys. Presented by Brady Plus and distributed by the Deseret News. Jeff, portal shopping's well underway now, and it's something you can do before and after Christmas. There's no Christmas rush for this, right? Where do you expect BYU to spend most of their time? In what position groups are they actively out there trying to fill a need? We just talked about defensive tackle, so we know that's an important one. So outside of defensive tackle, where else do they have needs that they're trying to fill right now?
The good thing about being 10-2 is you don't really have that many holes on your roster. It's easy during this time of year when everybody is out adding transfer portal bodies. It's easy to look, at a school like Utah. It seems like every day there's a new commitment coming to Utah out of the transfer portal. It's easy to feel a little bit of jealousy because the news is great. BYU doesn't have that many holes, so I really don't think they're going to add that many guys. I've had my eye kind of maybe 7, maybe 8 guys, depending on some attrition. Maybe they could push that up to 10, but BYU is not going to add a ton. So they're going to be really calculated, and that's okay because they went 10-2, and most of this team is going to be able to come back next year. So that's a good thing. It's a good thing that BYU is not in this every single day. There's a new body coming out of the transfer portal and joining the program. That speaks to continuity and all those things. In terms of the transfers that they are going to get, defensive tackle we've talked about, edge rushers they've already addressed. And I think those edge rushers are important because they want to bring in more guys on the edge. That will probably push some existing edge rushers inside. Guys like Vili Pua probably move inside, and they are a defensive tackle. So that's somehow BYU will use the transfer portal to address that position as well. For my dollar right now, offensive tackle and cornerback are really the only two glaring needs. If they can get 1 or 2 at each position, offensive tackle and corner, I feel pretty good. And then everything else that BYU does the rest of the way is probably gravy, right? Just go get best talent available, add it to your roster, and get better somewhere. But that's it, really. Offensive tackle and cornerback, I don't see any other glaring needs that BYU has to address in the transfer portal right now.
I'm glad to hear you say that they're going to move some guys from the outside down to the inside, because people forget that John Nelson and Blake Mangelsen, who were phenomenal as D tackles, were playing outside last year and the year before, and they moved them down inside, and they put on some extra bulk and some extra strength in the offseason with their strength and conditioning group, and they played every game. Those two guys played every game at D tackle for BYU, and they were extremely effective. So it's not a bad formula to take those outside guys, put some bulk on them, and move them inside, and you can kind of make your way doing that. So I'm glad to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's the recipe. And look, that's what Sione Pua has done his entire coaching career. That's what how he recruited at Utah. Junior Tafuna's been a great defensive tackle that Coach Pua recruited when he was at Utah. He was a 215-pound outside linebacker when he was at Bingham High, and now he's that almost a true nose tackle up there at Utah. That's what Coach Pua likes to do. So yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of that. And it was interesting. I was watching an NFL game a few weeks ago, and I noticed that there wasn't a true nose tackle. I wish I could remember which team it was. I want to say it was a Raider game. But there wasn't a true nose tackle for a few defensive series, like full series that they were running with defensive ends across the entire defensive front. And I think you're seeing this movement of we've got to get more athletic in the trenches, even if that means sacrificing a few pounds. So guys like Mangelsen and Nelson, they don't have to be 320 pounds to play defensive tackle anymore. If you're 280 and you could shoot gaps, that's a valuable asset to have. And I think that's the formula that BYU's coaches like.
Jeff, today the NCAA announced that if a senior played a year of junior college, he can come back next year and play one more year.
Unbelievable.
And that leads us to our Cougarboard question of the week, and you're an expert for this one. If you're not familiar with Cougarboard, it's the largest online community of BYU fans, thousands of posts every day. This question comes from one of their insider subscribers, and I know Cougarboard follows you very closely. What are the chances that the NCAA will be forced to not count junior college time as eligibility? How would that affect the game? Would there be more investment in junior colleges as a farm system? So that's a lot to throw at you. But is JC time going to count against Division I time?
If you like what you're watching, you can help us out by subscribing and hitting that notification button.
Man, trying to predict what the NCAA is going to do it's impossible at this point. But if I'm looking at it and just the way that things have kind of played out, yeah, I mean, I don't see a world where this gets challenged in court and the NCAA is able to continue to operate the way they always have. And to that end, I mean, I think you're one or two lawsuits away from no eligibility requirements at the rate things are going, that there are no rules until there's some sort of legislation passed. So I do think that junior colleges, that the groundwork has been laid to where those years spent at JUCO do not count towards your NCAA eligibility. Right now, it's all temporary while they go through this Diego Pavia court case and get it all finalized. The NCAA said they're going to appeal, but they will have this temporary eligibility for one season. But I do think it sticks, at least in some form or facet. And then what does that mean? I don't know. It's tough. I mean, if I'm looking at it as a player where the transfer portal's here, there's no more transfer rules where I'm going to lose a year and have to sit out. Maybe I want to save that eligibility if I'm a lightly recruited guy and I've got some walk-on opportunities. Maybe I go JUCO. But otherwise, I'm looking at it, if I've got scholarship offers from, Utah Tech and Weber State and then preferred walk-on offers, I might go to FCS. You get a little bit tougher competition, and then you can just transfer in a year anyways. Yeah. So I don't know that JUCO will ever be that true farm system like it seems like it could be, but it definitely will be more of a role. JUCO ball is just so tough, right? COVID decimated junior college football. Hopefully that's able to get rebuilt and there's more JUCO programs throughout the country. But right now it's tough. I think FCS has taken a lot of those junior college players, and that's kind of the route that things go. But maybe this eligibility stuff changes that in the future.
You mentioned the Diego Pavia case down in Tennessee. And by the way, hey, Gary Johnson, right when I just say Tennessee, Gary Johnson pops up and says, hello from Saudi Daisy, Tennessee.
Hey, Gary.
Right on time, Gary. But if this thing stands, like, is Jake Retzlaff back for another 2 years? Like, is Jake a sophomore? this last year, or he ain't gonna have 2 more years of eligibility for Pete's sakes. That's crazy. And does Darius Lassiter come back next year? I mean, what happens with BYU if this thing stands? Do you see some of these guys coming back another year?
I think that there's some that could. I mean, does Darius Lassiter have enough NFL guarantees, or is there an NIL package that could, look a little bit more attractive than a fringe draft guy and a practice squad guy? I think absolutely if that's the grade that Darius Lassiter gets, then it's going to be really tempting to come back to BYU for one more year. I think Caleb Etienne is in that same boat. I don't know that his stock is going to be any higher than it is right now, but if he goes and he meets with those NFL guys and he's a late round guy or he's an undrafted guy, I'm sure that BYU would be thrilled to have another year of Caleb Etienne, and he was also a JUCO guy. So, yeah, I think it's a big deal if it stands. Maury Bamba could come back for another year. There's a handful of contributors that could take advantage of it. I don't know that it's a surefire that absolutely yes they will just because that year is there, but depending on what that feedback is in that NFL circuit, then I think there could be some guys that take advantage of it.
Football recruiting guru Jeff Hansen of 24/7 Sports is on the Wise Guys, live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch, and wiseguys.com. A couple more questions for you before you reveal your top 5 all-time recruits under Kalani Sitake. We look forward to hearing that list. Saturday is the Alamo Bowl against Colorado. How important is this for BYU when you consider more people will probably watch this game than have ever watched BYU play football in its 100 years of getting it out there? How big is Saturday?
Normally I would say it's not that big of a deal. Bowl game results with opt-outs and different things like that. I don't think bowl game results diminish what BYU has done. And so I guess I say that if BYU were to lose, normally I would say that's not a big deal. But I think this year, because of the opportunity with the eyeballs, but also because of the narrative that came out about BYU during that last month of the season, that, hey, they were overrated, they didn't deserve the recognition or the fluky wins or whatever. If BYU comes out and beats Colorado, who, right or wrong, fair or unfair, is kind of universally accepted as a very, very good football team, and there are no flaws, right? The losses notwithstanding, they're a very good football team. If BYU could come out and make a statement against this Colorado team, I think it solidifies what BYU has done. That, hey, look, yeah, they had a few breaks go their way, but that's football. That isn't that BYU was fluky. That's just football. They had to be in position to get those breaks, and then the rest of the game, they had to go out and they had to win. So I think that the chance to put an exclamation point on this season and say, this was for real, and this is what BYU can expect and will be going forward, that's a huge opportunity that BYU has on Saturday.
In this matchup, you got BYU, whose defense is number 1 in the Big 12 in scoring defense and total defense. You got this Colorado offense with such dynamic play, really good wide receivers. They're throwing the ball all over the place. You got Shadur Sanders. You got the Heisman Trophy winner, Travis Hunter, out there. A matchup of strengths, right? So what tips the balance here in your mind in BYU's favor and Colorado's favor with that matchup of strengths?
I look at the weaknesses, and I think that's where that the strengths are going to – Colorado's going to score. They're going to get some yards through the air. They're just too good not to. BYU's going to make some plays. They're probably going to pull in an interception or two. They're too good not to. But does BYU let the Colorado running game get going? Or does the Colorado defense somehow come up and show up in a way that they really haven't all year long? That's where I start to look at it. Does BYU defensively – do they get gouged against the run? That would be a recipe for disaster for BYU. Offensively, can Jake Retzlaff protect the ball, or does he, does the offense stumble? Does the running game not get going? I look at those areas that aren't the headlines, and I think that's where this game is going to be decided, because the strengths are both strong, are strong on both sides of the ball. I have a hard time saying that one of them is stronger than the other, because both BYU's pass defense, Colorado's pass offense, they've been elite in every measure for both sides. So what about the rest of the game? Where are those 4 or 5 plays going to happen? Who makes those 4 or 5 plays that you're not expecting, that when you look back at the game tape, you say, that was a difference-making, a game-winning type of play? I think that's where it's going to come down to. So I'm looking at that BYU run game, How does Retzlaff protect the football through the air? And then can the defense control the line of scrimmage so that it has to be Shadur Sanders in the pass game that goes out and wins? There's not, a long fluky run or a special teams play or something like that.
And Michael says, Guru Jeff, BYU 100, Colorado 22. So he's drinking the blue Kool-Aid tonight.
Wow.
Jeff, Brandon Doman was on the show last week, and he thought BYU needs to run for at least 150 yards to win this game. Anything less, and he thinks it'll be harder to win. Do you agree? And how do they get those yards? And I might say a healthy Jake Retzlaff, does he get a lot of them?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if 150 yards is the measurement, but I look at it and I say the best way to keep that high-powered offense off the scoreboard is to keep them off the field. So if BYU can run the football, eat up clock, move the chains, that's, I think, the recipe. And fortunately, that's what BYU's offense has done very well at times this year is those long drives. They've got to capitalize in the red zone, but I think that's important for BYU. How do they do it? It's a combination of Jake Retzlaff in the run game. Look, he's not Taysom Hill, but he's a very good runner, and people kind of forget about it. So he's going to get he'll have his opportunities. But I look at this stable of running backs that BYU's got, Sione Moa, LJ Martin. They have had big games. Now that Pokai Honga is not at jeopardy of losing his red shirt, I'm really curious to see what A-Rod does to get him involved in this run game. I think BYU's got 3 running backs that are very good, and they've got Jake Retzlaff who can run the ball. Between the 4 of them, they ought to be able to move the ball on the ground against this defense.
There's more Sione Moa for me. That's what I've been saying all year. More Sione Moa. I know he hasn't been healthy, but Dave and I made our predictions. Should we tell Jeff our I said 34-24. So I have BYU by 10, which I know might be a little bit crazy. I feel like BYU is going to make a big play or two that's going to make a big difference. And Dave, what did you have?
38-31.
Yeah, so he's got 38-31. So both have fairly high scoring.
And Guru Michael's got 100 to 22.
Michael's got 100 to 22. That one's out there. That's out there.
Vegas is reacting to it right now.
Right now, the betting line just changed on this one. So what's your bowl prediction? Give us a score.
Yeah, I like high scoring as well. I think I'm right there with you, Dave. I think 38-31 makes a lot of sense. I maybe have it a little bit closer. I'll say 38-35. And this comes down to a field goal in the end. But I do think this is going to be high scoring.
If it comes down to a field goal, we've already talked about we like Will Ferrell.
We like Will Ferrell's chances to win this thing, right? So we also mentioned I pulled President Shane Reese aside and just said, I know you've done analytics on this thing. Come on, what are they? And he's a guru. Like, he's one of the best in the business. And I noted that Vegas line was 4.5 Colorado. And he goes, well, yeah, Blaine, I did a full breakdown. And he said, on a neutral field, I have BYU's three points better than Colorado. So you are right on the money with what Shane Reese is saying. So
there you go. Could be in worse company.
Yes, Jeff, before we do these 5, Earl Carr's on the stream and says, hey, Jeff, where do you see Gentry, the Michigan kid who's in the portal, where do you see him landing?
Yeah, I like where BYU's at there. I think he's taken visits to USC and Indiana as well. I don't think USC. I don't think he ends up at USC for a lot of reasons that
It just doesn't seem like a nice fit for him to me. Right?
Yeah, I just don't think that's where he goes. Indiana's got a lot of appeal, but I think ultimately he comes. I like where BYU's at. I think he'll make a decision in the next day or two.
Gentry and Clegg would be. That's a nice combo on both sides of the ball of guys they wanted coming out of high school that now would both come back there. That'd be a big.
It's Christmas time.
Yeah, it is Christmas time. We can always wish, right? So there you go.
5 Questions is presented by Strategy Square, delivering connection, clarity, and confidence in business and marketing strategies. Owned and operated by a BYU alum who's helping the wise guys conquer the world. You can reach Chantal at strategysquare.co. Jeff's 5 biggest recruits under head coach Kalani Sitake at BYU. Blaine, you ready to lead him through?
Yeah, let's go. And I hope you have them written down, because I want to go 5 to 1. I want to start with 5. So the 5th best down to the first. Let's start with number 5.
Okay. I don't know if this one's a surprise, but I'm going with James Empey.
Really?
James Empey, if you look at what that represented in the state of Utah, he was obviously a legacy guy, Mike Empey's son, all this stuff. And he signed with Utah. And that was a really familiar story for BYU fans for a long, long time. For those, for 7-8 years of independence, it felt like every legacy guy was going to Utah.
Yeah.
Kalani Sitake gets hired, And James Empey comes home from his mission and immediately flips and plays for Shiitake and plays for his dad at BYU. That was a big deal. That was a big win. And then obviously what he did on the field, he came in, immediate starter, replaced Tijon Karoma, who was great. And BYU really didn't take a step back at the center position the entire time that Empey played. But what that represented on the recruiting trail was that, hey, BYU's back and they need to be taken seriously, especially locally. I thought that was a big, big deal for Kalani.
Yeah, James was great. Great culture guy too. Great leader. Okay, now we're gonna go to number 4. Who's number 4 on your list?
Number 4, I got Chaz Aou. I mean, his career gets derailed by injuries there at the end, but the way that BYU won that recruiting battle, the helicopter, the national hype, he was, I don't know if he ever was officially committed to UCLA, but everybody expected him to commit to UCLA. Kalani and his staff flip him at the last second. I thought that was a huge win. And then that gave BYU a lot of publicity as well, that they were able to ride for a couple of years on the recruiting trail. That was a big one for me.
Yeah, we haven't had a helicopter land since.
And I feel so. I wish Chaz could have stayed healthy. Yeah. His instincts were just so good to the football, and then but the injuries just kind of slowed him down in terms of just flat out speed and quickness, and that's too bad. So, okay, we'll go to number 3 now.
Number 3, I've got Kingsley out of the transfer portal, the big 5-star offensive lineman coming back home. That was big. That's a big deal. Look what he did on the field, right? He came in, he started, he played on both sides of the line. Now he's pro. I mean, that story, everybody knows that story. I look at things from a recruiting lens, and what Kingsley proved is that you can be a 5-star, a legitimate, bona fide 5-star, come to BYU and get to the league. BYU needed a success story like that. Yeah. And for Kingsley to come back from Oregon and really shut everybody else out. He knew he was coming to BYU as soon as he hit the portal. That was a big win.
It's good.
That's a good one. Number 2.
Number 2, I got Puka. Similar story of, hey, you can have all the offers, all the attention in the world, come to BYU, have success, go to the NFL, become a superstar. I don't think there's any explanation needed. Puka Nacua was a huge recruiting win.
Yeah, and he just keeps on winning.
Oh, yeah. And he represents.
He just is so BYU. Yeah. Like, he doesn't – he's – he and Fred – they just act like BYU guys out there. They talk about their school all the time. The only guy better than those two right now at doing that is Andy Reid himself.
Right.
Andy Reid just wears it on his sleeve. Yeah, what are my Cougs doing? You got to love that. Right. So Puka's a walking commercial for BYU. I love him, and I love what he's doing for BYU. Okay, what about number 1?
Number 1, I've got Zach Wilson, and again, I look at it from that recruiting lens. The timing, right? That BYU was 4-9, coming off that awful 2017 season, and it didn't look like there was a lot of hope for the future. And Zach Wilson comes to BYU. The story everybody's heard 1,000 times. Grows up a Utah guy, all that good stuff. But comes to BYU and immediately changes the tone of the program, wins the job as a true freshman. He went through his lumps still. I mean, it's easy to forget that Northern Illinois game in 2018, that was brutal. Yeah. There were ups and downs still, but Zach Wilson provided some hope. And ultimately, 2020 speaks for itself. His success speaks for itself. I look at that recruiting win for Kalani and the coaching staff. I have no idea. Firing coaches isn't BYU's MO, but there's a really strong argument to be made that Zach Wilson saved this coaching staff's job because of the way that 2019 season, or excuse me, I keep saying 2017 season played out for them to get Zach Wilson and reestablish some hope in the fan base. I don't know how. I can't think of anybody else that was a bigger recruiting win on and off the field for Kalani.
Well, and during the COVID year, Zach was ESPN's Mr. Saturday Night Guy. Right. Everyone knew Zach Wilson. A big part of that. Hey, another Jeff has come on the stream with his own 5 best recruits, and he goes a different route. Jay Hill, Pahua, Papinga, Fessy, and Woods.
There you go.
That's a pretty
hard
good
to argue
group.
with that.
Yeah. And Jay's done a phenomenal job in recruiting on the defensive side of the ball. I like the recruits that Jay's been able to bring in the secondary and a linebacker have been phenomenal. It's really, really upgraded what they've done. So I like it. So he's got Zach Wilson at 1, Puka Nacua at 2, Kingsley Suamata'i at 3, Chaz Aou at 4, and James Empey at number 5. And all great rationale for all those. That's a great job, Jeff. We appreciate that.
And 38-35 BYU at the Alamo Bowl.
Yeah. And hey, I know you don't do as much basketball, but what about AJ DeBonsa? Like, where does he rate all time?
Oh, man.
How many football players is he going to get?
Yeah, that is unbelievable.
There might be an argument that he's the most important football recruit in this class, too.
That's what we're saying.
He's making BYU cool, and it's I don't want to be hyperbolic, but it's making its way throughout the country that, whoa, BYU, people who don't normally consider BYU are looking twice because AJ's coming.
You can follow Jeff on 247sports.com, Cougarsportsinsider.com, and on X at Rakoto10. Thank you for joining us. Merry Christmas to you and your family. And enjoy the game on Saturday, and we'll see you soon.
Appreciate you guys.
Thanks, Jeff.
Jeff Hansen. You know what we love about Jeff? He knows his stuff.
Yeah, he does. He really does. It's always fun to have Jeff on the show.
And he starts dropping names and this and that, and it's like, I'm glad we know him. Thank you for watching The Wise Guy.
If you like what you're watching, you can help us out by subscribing and hitting that notification button.